It is the story that simply won't go away, isn't it? Donald Trump, in what can only be described as a bombshell interview with GBNews' Bev Turner last night, said he had an obligation to sue the corporation, claiming this is beyond fake, this is corrupt.
Fake news was a great term, except it's not strong enough. I'd like it to be stronger. The word fake is one thing, but this is beyond fake. This is corrupt, what they did. I'm not looking to get into lawsuits, but I think I have an obligation to do it. This was so egregious. If you don't do it, you don't stop it from happening again. And I wonder if they've done it. We'll find this out. The nice part about litigation is we'll find out how many times have they done it to other people.
This important interruption is brought to you by ExpressVPN. Protect your money and your identity. Click the link in the description or scan the QR code here to get ExpressVPN right now and save up to 73% on annual plans today. Right, let's get back into it.
Well, let's be clear about one thing. This isn't a credible threat, is it? It's political theatre. And that is, after all, what Donald Trump does best. Legal experts have already highlighted the extraordinarily high hurdles this case has if it ever wants to win in court. But what worries me more is those who are circling the wagon. No doubt there have been grievous errors. The splicing of Trump's footage is hardly one, but allegations of pro-Hamas bias are much more arguable. Yet, to renew calls to defund the BBC, to call for its downfall would cause irreparable harm to the country. Now, last year, there were 88,475 hours of content on BBC iPlayer last year, enough to keep you busy for 10 years. And that doesn't even include radio, its foreign language services, and online material. And no doubt, there is a little bit of liberal bias here and there. The media world is full of us. So call out the BBC for its misdeeds, hold its feet to the fire, reform the BBC, but defund? Over my dead body. Now, Will, you were laughing there. You've just come back from Australia.
I have, yes.
Australia would kill to have something like the BBC as its national broadcaster, wouldn't it?
Well, number one, you realise they're our number one competitor, by the way, Cai, but we'll put that to one side, and we have been smashing them in the ratings for the last 4 months, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
The bigger point here is there is no justification for a state-run broadcaster in 2025. This is a relic of the times before the internet, when you had, radio, basically, and it was a very limited media landscape. You can now get information from anywhere and everywhere. There is literally no justification for a public broadcaster. If you're trying to tell me that, we need to still have, the great comedy that they used to produce but they no longer do, that can be done by streaming services. I will throw the question back on you. Why do we need a state-run broadcaster in an environment where there is information, entertainment, everywhere you can possibly look?
Hang on. The 11 million people who watched the final of Traitors the other day would beg to differ, right? Frankly, it still provides an excellent service.
Can we make a difference? Can we make a difference here between BBC News, where they report about the domestic and foreign affairs of this country, and BBC Entertainment? I think most people see them as separate entities. We compete against them as separate entities, and I think they should be treated as such, because BBC News is where that channel is getting into trouble. It's not so much their entertainment stuff, which, yes, is full of woke rubbish. People just turn off to that, hence why TV series like Doctor Who are failing, because it's just gone completely nuts. But BBC News has doctored twice the President of the United States, one on Newsnight, one on Panorama. BBC Verify has been pumping out misinformation. At what point do you say enough's enough?
Well, no, Alex. Every single producer in the land would agree that you have to sometimes cut together footage. Now, as long as it doesn't change...
Hang on, I'm coming back to that.
As long as it doesn't change...
Hi, I'm sorry.
Dr. Renee,
50 minutes. Why did it... Hang on, no, because I'm going to come back to this. 50 minutes were deliberately cut from here to here. They were looking for the words and they plastered them together. It is indefensible what they have done.
I think those who were rioting in the capital, in the heart of the US capital, knew exactly what they had been asked.
Okay, but what's the context in that? Don't peddle rubbish. What's the context of that? Were they writing before or after the speech?
And when was the documentary?
No, answer the question. Answer the question. Were they writing before or after the speech?
I can't tell you.
Well, I can. They were rioting before the speech. Not before his words were even uttered, this fight stuff was even uttered. They were already there. And then half an hour later, he was calling for them all to go home.
Okay, I want to come back on your 11 million people watching Traitors. I wasn't one of those people. You know why? Because I don't watch that kind of TV. I really don't. I do pay for Netflix, I do pay for Sky. Just because I want to watch the movies. I pay for Apple TV when I want to watch the movies. So those 11 million people could, just as I do, pay for the BBC to watch Traitors, Strictly, whatever else it is, to their heart's content. That's what choice in this world is about, and that's how businesses live or die by what they produce.
I disagree with that. I think
it's also a good argument for privatisation, because a company would pick that up, you know.
It's wrong.
Let's hear from
Look, listen, at the end of the day, we pay for a lot of stuff that we don't use. I mean, when's the last time you called out the fire brigade? We pay for that.
This is not the fire brigade.
Listen, I'm talking about there are services that we have that we all don't use. I know people who haven't been to the doctors and got those. They're still paying. No, it is a public service. That's what the BBC is, a public service.
And you can't...
It is a public service. Look, there are lots of parts of the BBC that if they was commercialised, it wouldn't exist.
Just because
local radio, BBC CBeebies wouldn't exist. The BBC problems, I mean, all the art stuff, none of that is really commercially viable. If we defunded the police, defunded the BBC, they wouldn't actually exist.
Trey,
but back to the news. You're right, Alex,
Trey, if you let your new son watch CBeebies, you are crazy.
I will absolutely let him watch CBeebies.
Really?
Because it's choice.
Well, then he will be indoctrinated.
Fine, he won't be, because he'll have me as a strong parent, not with me as a parent.
A strong parent doesn't let them do it.
A strong parent will let my child watch whatever I think he wants to watch. It's fine.
Okay.
But back to the news thing. Look, listen, you can't really defend it. They did get it wrong. Fine. But how many times has the BBC got it right? At the end of the day, they're accountable. Every single news organisation is biased in some way, especially now when we're in the world where things are getting really extreme. Either extreme right, extreme left. The fact that we've got a publicly accountable organisation that heads actually roll when things go wrong. How many other heads of papers do heads roll?
The problem that a lot of people have got with this is that they knew about this doctoring of the panorama footage 6 months ago, allegedly from this massive dossier of things that the BBC are getting wrong. At that point, your duty as CEO and the Director General and the producers on that show is to immediately go, that is a serious problem. This man is the sitting President of the United States. We are a publicly funded, essentially a tax organisation that people mostly have to pay for. Therefore, we are also representing the British public and the country.
True.
And I think you have a serious duty with that.
Yeah, no, look, you can't argue that. But when it did come out, people actually resigned. Where there are lots of media organisations where nobody does resign. And most of the time, the BBC doesn't go that far. I think in this case, it's because of Trump.
Right, but what you're saying is absolute nonsense.
It's not nonsense. You're saying that all the time. BBC is just pure propaganda every single time that they've got on the news.
A long list of people from commercial stations and newspapers who have had to resign. There's one very big one just recently because of things they have done and said. So that does happen. But the other point that you're completely missing is, firstly, the BBC is nowhere near as accountable as any other station. They made 1,500 mistakes against the Ofcom code on their Israel reporting, and they weren't sanctioned and no one resigned. If that had been this station, there would have been hell to pay, or any other paid for.
And the mistakes were overwhelming.
I think there are lots of stuff on this station that people get away with coming. We have to agree with that.
Wrong.
No, look, listen. There have been. There's been times that people have used dodgy stats from dodgy sources that have been on. But look, listen. I do. But that's what I love about GBNews. In pursuit of the truth, people will sometimes get things wrong. Would you not agree, Alex?
No.
In pursuit of the truth.
I don't think any channel is perfect.
No channel is perfect.
GBNews is not perfect. Nobody's perfect. But there is a big difference when the public are forced to pay for something. And that is one of the difficulties we have, is that if I didn't like what the BBC were putting out, I should be able to choose to not watch it and not pay for it. And I think if the BBC would stand on its own 2 feet and be paid for by the public in their own way, via subscription, I'd have no problem if they got something wrong and they held themselves accountable. I think the real issues here are the fact that there was a doctoring of the President of the United States.
Which is wrong. I'll never agree with that.
When they knew they doctored it, they then sat on it.
That was wrong.
Then they only apologised.
I mean, even Cai would say that was wrong.
No, absolutely.
You would agree that was wrong.
My question to you.
It's not just about Trump. It's about the Israel reporting. They constantly suppressed anything positive about Israel, and they promoted Hamas.
Thousands of hours of footage. Tens of thousands.
They have done damaged our society when they wouldn't platform the nurses that didn't want to get changed.
Are you throwing the baby out with the bathwater to say that these issues across so much of their programming and broadcasting means that we should defund the BBC? That is absurd.
It is absurd.
I don't watch it. Why should I
Yeah, but that argument about because I don't pay for something, I shouldn't
Literally
have
the
to.
day after this whole thing blew up, they then reported on Rupert Lowe's question time on social media, and they literally misquoted him with the video, and you could see the words literally misquoted, basically inferring that he was a racist. The day after this happened, there is institutional bias there.
Yeah, that stuff I don't like. That stuff I don't like. I have to admit. No, I don't like.
Because sorry, and I will say one more thing, because that would never happen on this channel, and there are broad ethical standards of journalism on this channel. You would never see sentences randomly spliced together to make a political message on this channel.
Not true. That happens in all channels.
It happens on all channels.
It does not happen on this channel.
It happens on all channels.
It does not happen on this channel.
Put aside whether it happens on this channel or not. It happens.
We have a certain set of
across the
values,
media.
but we also have
It happens
journalistic ethics.
Across
the BBC does not.
The media. You're not a journalist, Will, neither am I, right? But journalists who know this stuff on Twitter, on the news, all the time, so many people have come out and said, this is fairly usual, and did it really change the thrust of what it showed the viewers?
Yes.
Did it make a material difference to what happened?
Materially.
No. He obviously won
And
the
you would
election.
never see that on this channel.
This unprecedented action by a sitting president, foreign interference in our own national press, I can't believe that you are sitting there.
Kai, listen,
accepting
can
that,
I just say
as you
this?
did with Elon Musk.
Kai, can I just say this? Because
Absurd.
listen, you do sound absolutely ridiculous when you say things like that. You can make a very sensible argument that the BBC is a great institution that needs reform. You can make those arguments and not sound absolutely bonkers by saying Trump and Elon Musk are interfering in British politics when we have done the same thing to America. I mean, you cannot just pick and choose when you want to be outraged.
Over to help the Democrats.
All right. Well, I think that's quite enough of that. There'll be plenty more to come.
Every time you're online, your money and your identity are at risk. Scams now make up nearly 40% of all crime in the UK. That's thousands of attacks every single day. In Britain, someone has their identity stolen every 2 minutes, leaving victims with wrecked finances and years of stress. The threat is real, and you could be next. ExpressVPN is your shield against criminals. It locks down your devices, hiding your personal information and financial details from hackers, scammers, and anyone else looking to exploit you. So whether you're checking your bank, shopping, or just browsing, ExpressVPN makes you invisible to prying eyes trying to steal your money and your identity. ExpressVPN shields your data with military-grade AES 256 encryption. That's the same standard trusted by the US government to guard classified information. This is the highest level of online security you can get. So don't wait for disaster. Secure up to 14 devices at once and get powerful password protection. Real support is available 24/7 because cybercrime never sleeps. Save up to 73% on annual plans today. Every moment you hesitate is another moment you're exposed. Protect your money and protect your identity. Get ExpressVPN right now.
We'll try it once again. Is it time to defund the BBC? Seconds out, it's round one.
I'll tell you what. I'm going to take this away, Kai. Okay, so I don't want the BBC to fail. I don't want the BBC to close. I want the BBC to be there, but I want it to live or die on the strength of its own merits. It's as simple as that. Everything in the world, normally, that we have to pay for lives or dies on its own merits. You can't compare the BBC to somebody paying for schools when they don't have children, because that's not a service, that's a societal giving. The BBC is not that anymore, and the recently leaked report has shown us that. Its biases are so far-reaching that we've already seen Trump saying he's going to sue them for editing what he said to make it look like he was inciting violence in a very direct way. He wasn't in that speech. It wasn't an error. You don't accidentally lose 49 minutes of an interview, splice it together, not tell anyone you've spliced it together, and then just put it into a documentary. It wasn't an error. It was a deliberate attempt to make him look like he'd said something that he didn't. That is bias. The BBC is supposed to be unbiased. It's literally in their charter. They then played it again on a different programme, slightly tweaked again. So this just shows us what they want. They didn't want a Donald Trump presidency, that's for sure. But it went much further than that. They were found guilty in this report of promoting Hamas stories that were in favour of Hamas and suppressing anything from Israel that looked OK. We saw with John Sopel that he immediately said that Israel had bombed a hospital with no evidence, and it actually turned out to be Hamas. We've seen now that they absolutely censor gender-critical voices like mine, women who want to stick to biological facts and a new man can be a man and a woman, and they promoted trans ideology. We also saw that their cartoons for toddlers have actually been embedded with trans ideology, and so the list goes on. It is not impartial, it is not living up to its charter, and yet we are forced to pay for it, even if we do not have a TV, even if we do not watch it ever, we still have to pay for it. That's just extortion. It's nothing but. What we need is for the BBC to take their really good stuff that everybody talks about and sell it to the people who really want to watch it, like those 11 million traitors watchers. I'm not one of them. I'll stick to what I've got. That's what should happen.
I thoroughly disagree with that. What that sounds like is let's throw the baby out with the bathwater. Yes, I'm not going to sit there and defend what the BBC did with Trump. You know, when Trump talks about fake news, I think the BBC handed that to him on a plate. Granted, we're talking about BBC News. The BBC is actually way bigger than that. It is vast. It's something that all of us have grown up with. It's the oldest news broadcaster in the world. It's not just news. We're talking about a myriad of different functions it had, which if the BBC was purely operating commercially only, lots of them would actually disappear. We're talking about local radio. It wouldn't be commercially viable. We're talking about a lot of the children's programmes, CBBCs, etc. It wouldn't be commercially viable. We're talking about BBC at the proms and this incredible stuff that BBC does with the arts. Most of that would not be commercially viable. Then we're talking about things like the BBC World Service, something which so many countries around the world listen to and rely on, something that continues the BBC tradition, the British tradition of spreading Britishness around the world and informing people around the world. Most of that also wouldn't exist, and everyone's always talking about our values. Well, those values in those countries would suddenly disappear. We shouldn't be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Sure, absolutely, there'll be elements of the BBC that might need to reform. I am completely in favour of that. But taking away the public funding is a completely huge, disastrous reaction to what's happened. The BBC for so many years has been a bastion of some incredible news, incredible coverage, and it should not be defunded at all whatsoever, although perhaps it should be reformed. That's all I can say.
That's absolutely fine. Then let's say to every member of the British taxpaying public, well, actually, it's not even just taxpayers, it's everybody, you know, would you like to opt in or out to publicly funding the BBC? Because, you know, this joke about abroad, Al Jazeera and all of that, there's enough of these things outside of the BBC. We've got BBC Arabic. Why do we need it if we've got Al Jazeera? You know, there's always an alternative. And in terms of spreading Britishness around the world, we can't even spread Britishness in Britain. So I really don't know how we're spreading it around the world. We don't even know what it is anymore.
But Renee, people in Tuvalu won't be able to watch the BBC anymore. Look, absolute tragedy.
Look, there are lots of people on the right who've always had it in for the BBC. Why? Because they showcase minorities, people who otherwise you would never, ever see on TV. And I'm not saying it like one of these lefties, I think minorities needs to be showcased. But there are a lot of people that otherwise wouldn't have a voice without the BBC. You know, and that is actually an important thing. I think there are people who would never, ever be seen. The BBC supports so much diversity in its programme.
I would say the BBC in the past has done some really good things for Britain, but it has always been used as a propaganda tool. In fact, it was set up as a propaganda tool in the first place. It's run by government. The government have a massive say in how the BBC is run. In fact, it's the only thing the government, only media institution the Culture Secretary has special powers for, and that should tell you about how close it is.
It's not quite run by government, though.
Well, it has a massive influence in it, and of course, we have to take that into consideration. All I'll say is at what point do we say, actually, time for change? The government needs to shrink in this country. The tax deficit in this country for people, and we're paying a burden of all-time high sides, right? And you have to say to yourself, at what point do we just stop taxing people? Let British people decide what they can and can't watch.
Can I also add that the BBC doesn't own diversity? On this panel, we have a mix of sexes, sexual orientations, nationalities, races, and it's a 5-person panel. And I think you could say that across GB News. But the second thing that I would say, and fortunately I've never been into the BBC studios, I've been into the ABC studios in Australia, and I think it's analogous. I was shocked at how many people were in there, how many computers, how many screens. We are very proud of the product we put out on GB News, but we want to run a very lean, efficient operation. The amount of money that would be wasted in the BBC would be absolutely...
That would be the same argument against the NHS.
Can I ask, putting aside whether the BBC manages to create some sort of balance, to create that neutral voice, which I know you don't think, is there still in this world a role for a channel that presents the news, tries to present both sides of the argument rather than opinion, rather than debate?
Well, can I just say, first of all, I don't think that's possible because every editor and every presenter, everyone has their own decisions, the way they read, the way they say something, has their own opinions. And I think we are better off in living in a society where we just appreciate human beings exist. Otherwise, you might as well get your news from ChatGPT, right? That's what you want the BBC to be. You want to be a robotic institution that can never get anything right because everyone's got an opinion. So I think its day is over in that respect. What I'd say to you guys though is this: what do you think the BBC generates as value for the British taxpayer? Where is their value these days? Because I think you've got to point to it. If you're talking, I'm talking specifically about its news area here. Where is the value for BBC News now for British taxpayers?
I honestly think that you would find, apart from these errors, right, which most people don't complain about at the time. So that documentary, the Trump documentary, nobody complained at the time. It was noticed after the fact. I really do think that if you polled the majority of this country, they think that the benefit outweighs those errors. Having a news source that most of them trust, still the most trusted news source in the world.
Oh, do you know?
And that goes for the majority of the country. You know, some people don't want that. That's fine. And there has to be some model, I think, for that. Go on, Dr. Renee.
I'm so tired, and this started more in COVID, of people trotting out, it's the most efficacious vaccine that's ever been produced. 99% of scientists agree that climate change is this. This is the most trusted news source in the world. These are just all sound bites. Yeah. And I suggest to you, Cai, that next weekend, if we revisit this, there's going to be polls out this week about how much you trust the BBC, and I suspect that this will have been the nail in their coffin.
And the key difference is we're all very open with our opinions and where we stand on the political spectrum. When we do news commentary, I would say that what Sophia presents is far more objective than anything that the BBC would put out in their news commentary. I don't think there is a need for objectivity because the BBC is not objective. They clearly have left-wing bias.
Well,